Imagine that you live in a world where you are not able to see your family, and couldn't have criticism on the people that controlled your country. This almost seems like a nightmare to most people nowadays, but to people who lived in East Germany in 1960, this was sadly a reality. The year was 1945, and Germany just lost the Second World War. Germany is split in two parts by the Allies and the Soviet Union. This was decided in the Yalta Conference. In the Yalta Conference, it was decided that Germany would be split in four areas. One area was controlled by the United Kingdom, one by France, one by the USA, and one area by the Soviet Union. Berlin was also divided in four parts, between these powers. After World War II, the Cold War started and tensions arose between the East and the West. In the East, there was the Soviet Union, and in the West, the USA. In the summer of 1945, the border between East Berlin, that was controlled by France, the United Kingdom, and USA, and West Berlin, that was ruled by the Soviet Union, was marked by checkpoints and markings on trees. If you wanted to cross the border, you needed permission.
What was the Berlin Wall?
The Berlin Wall was built on the 30th of August 1963. It was a wall which separated East and West Germany, and the wall was built more or less overnight. And it had an enormous impact on the people living in Berlin because they were literally separated overnight. People couldn't get back to their homes after they worked, for example, in West Berlin, and friends were separated. It was a very emotional event which happened. It wasn't only the Berlin Wall. East and Germany were separated through a long, long wall, but in Berlin the wall had a very immense impact because Berlin was like an island living, being in East Germany.
On 7 October of 1949, the Soviet Union established the Duitse Demokratische Republiek, on the Soviet-controlled part of East Germany. Since the Duitse Demokratische Republiek, DDR in short, was established, more and more inhabitants of East Germany fled to the western part of Berlin in hope of a better life without Soviet control. Between 1949 and 1961, 2.6 million inhabitants of East Berlin fled to West Berlin. The motive for this was because the economy in East Berlin was worse than in West Berlin. Another motive would be the power of the Soviet Union and communism. If you had criticism, you could risk a couple of years in prison. You would be arrested by the Stasi, the Ministerium für Staatsgerechtigkeit, or in short, Stasi was an organization in the DDR. They were in charge of surveying and espionage in the DDR.
How did the wall affect people's lives?
As I already told you, Finn, people, friends and families, they were separated from each other, and also a big difference were that people living in East Berlin or in East Germany, they weren't allowed to travel anymore to West Berlin or to West Germany or to other European countries. They were only allowed to travel to East European countries, for instance, for holidays. So they were really isolated from West Germany and from other European countries. And to access Berlin, you had to travel via a transit route, and you could only enter Berlin on very specific passport control stations. So it was a very anxious situation traveling to West Berlin because soldier and border control was everywhere.
Because of a large part of the population left East Berlin, the economy there became even worse. The fact that the economy became worse and worse was a big threat to the DDR. Eventually, in 1961, on the 13th of August, Walter Ulbricht and the leader of the Soviet Union decided to build a border between East and West Berlin. The purpose of this border was to end the outflow of inhabitants from East to West Berlin, with keeping the inhabitants in East Berlin from migrating to the West Berlin. The Soviet Union tried to save the economy in the DDR. the Berlin Wall was built.
What did the wall in Berlin look like?
The Berlin Wall was 155 kilometer long and divided East and West Berlin, and the wall was 4.2 meters high, and lots of places they had two walls, and in between these two walls was a kind of no man's land. We called it the Death Stripe, and soldiers, border controls, cars, dogs were patrolling there, mainly at night, to avoid that people could escape over the wall.
The construction of the Berlin Wall began on the 13th of August 1961. The wall consisted out of concrete bricks with barbed wire on top. In the wall there were 7 openings, so-called checkpoints. In the beginning the wall was not perfect, so a lot of East Berliners tried to cross the border to West Berlin. The wall was heavily secured by police in the DDR. The soldiers that guarded the wall had a Schiessbevel, which meant that the guards had permission to shoot anyone that tried to cross the border. Because a lot of people tried to cross the border, a lot of people died, but some did make it. Of all the escape attempts, there were 138 deaths. Because the wall was not perfect in the beginning, there were flaws. People would jump out of windows of houses that were located on the border and were part of the wall to get to West Berlin. But it was quickly patched by filling up all the windows that faced the west side of Berlin with bricks. After every successful escape attempt, the wall was changed, so that it won't happen again. An example of this is when a couple friends who lived in the west side of Berlin dug under the wall. One of these friends wanted their mom, who lived in the east side of Berlin, to come to West Berlin. But crossing the border became harder and harder the more people tried successfully. So the friends concluded that going over the wall was not possible, so they decided to go under it. They dug a tunnel in a house close to the border. They did the digging in the basement. The dirt that they dug up was stored in the room in the basement, so there was no suspicious pile of sand on the street. The group of friends also did not go outside while digging the tunnel to avoid suspicion. After a lot of digging, the tunnel was finished. After half a year, the result was a 75 centimeter high and wide tunnel under the Berlin Wall. On 3 October 1964, the first refugees passed through the tunnel. Just in 2 days, 57 East German refugees crawled under the Berlin Wall to safety. But one of these refugees had betrayed the group of friends, and one night the Stasi showed up in the east side of the tunnel. But the people that were there could still escape.
Did the people of Berlin know the wall was going to fall that day and or anytime soon? And if they did, how did they know?
There were some indicators that there might be some changes and that people could maybe travel to East Germany, and but no one really believed that the wall was falling down. So it was a very unsecure time, and people in East Germany, they went on the street and they demonstrated for their rights, and I remember there was a demonstration once in East Berlin where 500,000 of people demonstrated against the GDR leadership. So the GDR politicians, they got more and more pressure, and it is hard to believe, but on the 9th of November 1989, a GDR politician made a misannouncement, and so it was an announcement and with huge consequences, and thousands of people, they traveled to the border control, especially to Potsdamer Platz, to Brandenburger Tor, because the politicians said people could travel right now, but that was, as I said, a miscommunication. But the pressure was so high that the patrolling police, the border control, couldn't manage the thousands of people coming through the wall to the border control. So they opened the wall, and people went to East Berlin for the first time on foot, with their trolley, with their cars, and it was a wild spectacle this night.
And or anytime soon, and if they did, how did they know?
There were some indicators that there might be some changes and that people could maybe travel to East Germany, and but no one really believed that the wall was falling down. So it was a very unsecure time, and people in East Germany, they went on the street and they demonstrated for their rights. And I remember there was a demonstration once in East Berlin where 500,000 of people demonstrated against the GDR leadership. So the GDR politicians, they got more and more pressure, and it is hard to believe, but on the 9th of November 1989, a GDR politician made a misannouncement, and so it was an announcement and with huge consequences, and thousands of people, they traveled to the border control, especially to Potsdamer Platz, to Brandenburger Tor, because the politicians said people could travel right now, but that was, as I said, a miscommunication. But the pressure was so high that the patrolling police, the border control, couldn't manage the thousands of people coming through the wall to the border control. So they opened the wall, and people went to East Berlin for the first time on foot, with their trolley, with their cars, and it was a wild spectacle this night.
Over all the time the wall was there was a lot of criticism on the wall by the people living in the DDR and people not living in the DDR. One example of this is the famous quote of John F. Kennedy, when on the 23rd of June 1963, when he was visiting West Berlin, he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner." Another American president, who also shared his opinion on the wall, on the 12th of June 1987, Donald Reagan said, "Tear down this wall." This was a direct message to the President of the Soviet Union. In 1989, the time was finally there. In May, the Iron Curtain was opened on the border of Hungary. A lot of inhabitants in the DDR went to Hungary to cross the border and go to the west. On the 9th of November 1989, the wall in Berlin finally fell. It all started with Günter Schabowski, who held a press conference. In this conference, he said that every DDR inhabitant may cross the border. When asked when this will come into effect, he searched through his papers and said, "I think right now." Thousands of DDR inhabitants went to the wall, and there was a lot of confusion for the border guards. They did not know what to do. They asked permission to defend the border, but they were not given permission to defend the wall, but permission to defend their own base. Eventually, the East Germans stormed through the checkpoints and the guards did not interfere. The Berlin Wall fell and people were free to cross the border.